go pick something up, but that's all right. I give my best material to the house here, so y'all get my best work. So praise the Lord. Okay, we're going to be continuing our little series here. We're going to cover the life of Jacob. Jacob is an interesting character. What a guy, huh? And so we'll talk a little bit about him. I want to give you some tools, I think, that are helpful for reading Genesis well. Some weeks ago, I talked about how I believe Genesis chapters 1 through 11 are the prologue to the Bible, but Genesis in particular. And what I mean by that is the themes that we see played out in these early chapters, they're on repetition. So what I'll do is I'll just write the word Genesis 1 through 11 here. So we have 1, 2, we could put no, we put 3 dots up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 8, something like. Really, we want 6, 9 by itself, 10 to 11. Okay. Do we all remember what these chapters are about? Right? That's squared away in our noodle noggins. We got it. I promise you, only the first 15 minutes of tonight's lesson is going to be boring. The last 45 minutes, you're all going to really be excited. You're going to be like, my God, he's preaching tonight. That's okay. We'll get there. But we need to learn something before we get real excited. So Genesis 1 and 2 is about creation, right? So we say creation, and we throw in blessing. And what's here in Genesis 3? Fall. You could say failed test. Okay. What happens in 4 and 5? Oh, we're skipping 4. What happened in chapter 4? Yes, brothers fight, or you could say separate. Right. One separated because he died. Okay. 6. What happened in 6? We had 6. There's violence, outbreak, and then what? And then 7 and 8 is the flood. On the other side of the flood, God re-enters into covenant with Noah again. So the covenant, and he uses the word blessing. So blessing starts to repeat. And then this is implicit in the story. It's not obvious, but Nimrod is called a Gibor, which is like the descendants of the human giants, the human angel crossbreed from Genesis 6. Those are Giborim, these are Gibor. So it's implied that there's violence that happens again, a testing of some sort with the Tower of Babel. They fail the test, and then judgment comes again. So the flood, I'll put beside the flood judgment. Right? And then what you would need to know is key words from each of these sections, and they are repeated heavily throughout the Bible, right? So, like, think of like trees and fruit and seed, right? That should activate this. Seeing, taking, right? Crafty, being subtle, right? Jacob is subtle. So you want to think of stuff like that. Brothers, you want to think crying out because his blood cried out. And my brother's keeper. Just these sorts of phrases should come to our mind. Or just tension between brothers should activate this for you. So violence breaking out. So if you see lots of war, you see like people being murdered and violence, and that's probably something that should come to your mind. So the judgment. This one is real interesting. I would have to share a document with you about this. There's a lot of specific terminology that's used in the flood narrative that's on repeat throughout the Bible. That's really cool. But when you think about, a simple way to think about it is God responding to the situation and judging the situation on the ground, right? So an equivalent would be here it's the flood, but in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, he rains fire from heaven, right? So those are acts of judgment. And so really you're supposed to read Sodom and Gomorrah right beside the flood narrative. There's a lot of parallels there. Okay. And then usually after the violent outbreaks and judgment, normally God will bless again, right? So they'll either meet near trees or the word covenant will come up again, or something that evokes blessing will happen usually after this. And then they get tested and the cycle starts all over, right? So these are the major themes that you see early on in Genesis. These themes are on repeat. And so this, you can probably see some of these things in the Jacob story. These are things I'm certain you can start seeing. Or even let's not think about the Jacob story. Let's think about the book of Genesis in general, right? Tell me where you can see some parallels between this and the book of Genesis. Anything come to mind? Pick one of these. It's real easy. Brothers fighting, right? So, all right, so you have brothers fighting. Which brothers? There we go. Jacob and Esau. What other brothers fight in the Bible, in Genesis? Except Jacob and Esau. Cain and Abel. That's the original here in 4 and 5. There's another big fight with brothers. Joseph and his brothers, right? So that happens on repeat. There's a bunch of brothers fighting, right? This is, so let's, a cool one too that we see is how does Esau trick his dad? Jacob, excuse me. How does Jacob trick his dad? So he kills an animal and he puts it on so he can trick his father. Is there any time else that you use the dead animal to trick a father? Joseph. The brothers slay an animal and they put blood on it and it tricks their dad. Repeat. The Bible rinse and repeats themes over and over and over and over again. It happens a lot. And so you're supposed to be, as you're reading the Bible, you're looking for key words in each story. You're looking for repeated actions. And you're supposed to, I know it's a lot, but commit them to memory. And so as you're reading on, you say, this looks familiar. This looks really, I feel like I've been here. And you should feel that way. You should feel that way. Like, when you do this on repeat for chapter after chapter after chapter, when you finally get to Leviticus, everything is supposed to be going off. You have a human in all white clothes that shines with jewels going into a tent that has fruit and angels on it, and they meet the presence of God there. Like, that's the Garden of Eden. And these are humans who are wearing all white, so they're shining white. That's like divinity, right? So these are glorified humans in a garden space with God's like, it's on repeat. That's the whole Bible. And so as you're slowly reading through the Bible, you're picking up these skills so you can see these repetitions. Sometimes what you want to be careful is you don't want to make repetitions there that aren't really there, but they're certainly there. The Bible's not written accidentally, so it's definitely that sort of thing. So this is a skill that takes a very long time to develop. It takes a while, so I'm just teaching you to be aware of it so you can start practicing it. It took me 2 or 3 years of becoming aware of this technique to start noticing things on my own without the help of commentaries. That's 2 or 3 years of like really pouring over the text. So it takes some time. I had a whole introduction prepared about the ancient Near East and all that, and I'm just not going to go over it. And the reason why I'm not going to go over it is because it would take me an hour. So I won't do that. I'll spare you. I put a bunch of documents on the Slack that you can look at. You can consult those. And it'll give you some helpful background information. what I want to do is get into some of the exciting things for the lesson tonight. So we want to think about the shape of the story, the shape. Remember how last week we saw that it was that pattern where the outside parts of the story matched, and then there's all those repetitions? The same thing happens with the Jacob story. I need you to go to the Slack and open the document, because if you, it's too much to me for me to write here, and I need you to see it. And so it'll be easier, and if somebody has it, y'all can share with people on the row. But it's the one that says the Jacob, Leah, Rachel story. Y'all see it? Okay. I want you to see how much intentionality was put into writing these stories. Do you see how carefully they designed these narratives? That is incredible, right? It starts off with a struggle for birth, and then the twins are born, and then the story wraps up with the struggle for birth, and Rachel dies. It's opposites, right? One, life is brought in, and one other times life's brought in, but there's death with the life. Okay, and then we have Jacob's mother, Rebecca's endangered in a foreign place. Then we have Jacob's daughter, Dinah, endangered in a foreign. Like, the Bible is so incredibly designed. Now, what I could do is lay out every single one of these and then show all the nuances of how every single one of these points connects. But that would be stressful, because that would take me too much time in and of itself. So what I've done is I've highlighted two matching narratives, so two sets of matching narratives, and then I want to focus on the center. Because if you look at the very center, that's labeled H, at the very center, it's Joseph being born. And it took me a while to get at why the author would do this. Why should I be that interested in Joseph being born? He literally gets like 13 chapters later on. And so the man gets plenty of screen time, yet the author saw fit that they wanted to bring your attention to it, even just as a foreshadow. Like, this is going to be really critical. And so I'll end with that, why I think the author, Moses, put it as such. I think it's going to be very interesting. So the first two mirror events that I want to talk about, it's the encounters with Jacob and Esau. First time, deception is at the center of the story. The second time is reconciliation. Right? And so these are vast and these are really incredible stories. So let me give you some helpful things. Do we know the difference between birthright and blessing? Birthright and blessing, the difference. It's okay, I looked it up too. Did you hold this for me? Quickly, we're running low on time. Thank you. I want to write something down. Okay. Oh, there. So, the word for birthright. Well, it's going to be what it is. All right. And then here. Ooh. They're similar words. They might not look like it because of my handwriting, but they're similar. Bechorah. Berachah. Thank you. Great. All right. The first word there is birthright. Bechorah. And then blessing is Berakah. Berakah. So like Baruch or Barak is related to the word. That's blessing. So they're similar. there's a lot of similarities. So the birthright is you're the firstborn son, and you are going to be, so their household structures were different. There was a patriarch, and this person was responsible for managing the whole household, which was not just their kids. It's cousins and stuff like that out a couple generations, the degrees this way and down to grandkids. And so this guy was handling a whole house. And so it was quite a role. You would manage family disputes. And so let's say Journey, I looked at Diamond about to want Journey. Let's say Journey was getting into a whole tiff with her cousin. Well, then your grandpa would be the one to say, well, I'm going to give my ruling. Well, he's the patriarch. That's his job, right? And so, like, it's that sort of thing. Or, let's say for whatever reason, my brother-in-law, he dies. So now my sister needs to be provided for, all right? Which one of her brothers are going to take care of her? Well, the patriarch is going to look through it and see, all right, well, I'll take care of for this season, but then I'm going to die, so I want to make sure that there's a succession plan to make sure all the women are provided for. This is the patriarch's job, right? And so it's the care for the well-being and the health of the family direction. If we're going to move, the patriarch's like, hey, we're picking up shop, we're moving to this town, right? And so we're settling here. That's what Esau sold to Jacob for food. It was, it comes with a lot of wealth. So he would have been very wealthy. So a lot of wealth was given away that day, but also a very prestigious position. Especially because these family units were so big, because each individual families would also have like servants and slaves and different things like that. And so if you were the patriarch, you were managing a couple hundred people, if not a couple thousand people, depending on how big your family was. You were a small nation. And so you were basically, by birthright, leading a small nation. When Abraham was, I think we don't picture this well. When the patriarchs were walking around, think about this. Abraham had a standing army of 318 people just at a given time. Which means when he was traveling around, he was walking around with hundreds of people, hundreds of livestock. Like, he was a small city. He was leading this giant group. And so, being the next elected, you're the new chieftain, basically. So it's a quite the position. That's what he gave up. Now, the blessing is the other thing that was deceived from his brother with this whole incredible act of, well, I'm going to put the goat skins on, and I'm going to put my brother's clothes on so I can smell like him. And they apparently had very different voices, because Jacob goes into his dad, say, I'm Esau, bless me. Doesn't sound like Esau. But dad is like, well, you can't fake that smell. The man works outside. So he hugs him and he smells him and is like, that's Esau. Maybe he has a cold. I don't know, but that smells like Esau. Ooh, Harry, that's my boy. Boy is rugged, right? And so he deceives him, and he gets his blessing. And the blessing is the promise that God gave to Abraham. That's what he lost there. That special covenant relationship. For our concern, the line by which our Savior would come from was determined by this blessing. This carried prophetic weight and destiny. Or to put it in modern apostolic lingo, because we like to use it, and we make up a bunch of our own lingo. It's he gave away his prophetic destiny. It's like Brother Grimsley coming and giving you a word, and you're like, yeah, God, but give it to this person. And then it comes to pass for them, and then you're mad because you gave it up. And except in his case, it was taken from him, right? He gave up his prophetic destiny and gave it to another. So that's what happened there. Let's look at Genesis 25. Genesis 25. I want to look briefly here at the description of the brothers. They have a very interesting descriptions. So Genesis 25, and let's look at verse 24. Genesis 25, 24. I actually don't have it in the slides, but that's okay. Genesis 25 and 24. It says, and when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all over, like a hairy garment. I would have freaked out. I was delivering a room, and a kid came out looking like that. Like, good God, what is that? Put that thing down. Like, I'd been freaking out. And they called him Esau. Could you imagine how hairy a baby has to be for the doctors to look and say, it looks like a garment? It's not like kid comes out with a little fuzz on their head. Looks like a garment. Crazy description. They called him Esau. And after that came his brother. His brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old, and when she bare them. Now this is where it gets interesting. And as the boys grew, Esau was a cunning hunter and man of the field. Stop. What does that remind you of? Well, how? Cain was, he had fruit. He worked with fruit. So he was a cunning hunter. Yes, Nimrod. There we go. So he's like Nimrod. So what you're supposed to be thinking here is you're loading in the Nimrod slide. So he was a hunter. He was probably a pretty big guy then. Probably a man of stature. He was a great hunter. But what's interesting is that it uses the word cunning. Or cunning. You know what? Well, before I say, let's look up this word. Let's look up the word. I'm about to get too excited. I don't want to say something that's not true. As you can tell, Pastor doesn't Hebrew every single word. But cunning is an interesting observation. And it just depends on what word they use there. Okay, I thought it was the same word for subtle for the snake. Okay, which wouldn't make sense to me in this story. So that would leave me with the puzzle that I wouldn't have an answer for, but it's not. Okay, so basically what they're saying, I don't like the word cunning here. That's a bad translation because it's misleading. It'd be better to say he was a knowledgeable hunter because it's the word to know. Like cunning implies like being subtle, like arum, like the word for the snake. It's not that word. It's yada, like to know. So it should have just said he was a knowledgeable hunter, or he was an expert hunter. Any of those would have made more sense with the Hebrew word that's used. But, whatever. Then it said this about Jacob. Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. I was so intrigued by the word plain. I said, did the Bible just throw that much shade at this man? Just, you are plain, boring, nothing exciting about this man. That's what I thought the word meant. But it's not what the word means. When you look up the word and see where else it's used to describe Job. Job being upright and righteous. It's the same word to describe Job. He was an upright man. That confused me. I'm like, Jacob is not an upright man. So, but why is it using, and that's why I think they use the word plain, because the translators are probably also confused. They're like, this guy? And so, if you left the story there, you'd be equally confused as I am. I could not figure out, and there's probably some riddle in the Hebrew here that I just don't know. Because would anybody here describe Jacob as upright and righteous? I mean, maybe if you squint and look a certain way. But commentators, I read a bunch of these commentators, and they're like, well, he's really not upright. What's interesting, and I think this is helpful, is do we remember the name of the Greek version of the Old Testament? It's called the Septuagint. I'm going to keep repeating it until we get it. It's the Septuagint. And I want to know what the Greek word was for there. And that Greek word is not a common word. Pleistos is the word that's used there. And basically what it means, it has two major meanings. It means one, unfinished product. It's an unfinished product. something that's unfinished. It still needs to be finished. But it has another meaning, which is resistant to being molded or not able to be shaped. I'm like, oh no. He's an unfinished product. You can imagine this. The picture the Greek word paints is you have clay that it's unfinished, but it won't let the potter mold it. I don't know why the Greek translators went with this word. I have no idea why they made this executive decision, but it was a good one. Because if this don't describe Jacob, I don't know what does. At this point in his life, he's an unfinished product. And he is very headstrong and stubborn, and he does not want to be shaped, molded, or made different. He is very resistant to the hand of his maker. And you know what's really interesting? One of the stories that happens later is he has an encounter with God, and what happened? He's changed. He becomes moldable. He might not have been at this point in his life, but eventually he becomes moldable. And I'll talk more about that when I get there. And so that should be encouragement to us, whether it's us or whether it's some of our loved ones. They might be stubborn and hard-headed and resistant today, but that's not the final story. If God can mold and shape a Jacob, he can mold and shape us too. And so, okay, so the first encounter that Jacob and Esau have is Jacob is grabbing his brother's heel. He takes away the birthright. He takes away the blessing, and then he gets out of Dodge. He's just gone. I was about to make a crazy joke. Can't say that on the internet. Yep. Yeah, so he went, yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that. And so let's look at the other one. So the other encounter with the brother, right? So many odd years later. So instead of deception, the whole interaction changes. And, oh my goodness, if you've ever read, I've read this before, but this is so good. This had to have been written by the Lord. This is so good. Let's look at Genesis 33. All you people who've been in church for a long time, I'm sure you've heard this preached, but I'm a simple man. When I read exciting things in the Bible, I still get really excited. And so I don't care if I've heard it preached. I get worked up every time because it's just so cool. Because there's some phrases in the Bible that are just so extraordinary. I'm like, this just deserves more meditation. This is one of them. Genesis 33, verses 10 to 11. So at this point, Jacob has gone out. Him and his brother, they've met, they've touched, and they're reconciled, right? Look what it says. And Jacob was trying to bless his brother. He was trying to give Esau a blessing, trying to just pay him back. He said, man, God's blessing me. I want to bless you. And Esau's like, well, I've been established. I'm doing well. I'm overwhelmed with blessing myself. I'm good. No, look, I'm just glad that we can make things right. And then look at this. And Jacob said, nay, I pray thee, if now that I have found grace in your sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face, as though I have seen the face of God. Now was pleased with me. I'll move on to verse 11 in a second. That is such a crazy thing to say. He says that when I have seen your face, to me, it was as seeing the face of God. Keep in mind, just before this, what did he do? He wrestled with God. And he wrestled with God, and now he's saying, I just looked upon the face of God. And now when I'm looking at you, Esau, I see God's face. I'm like, this is so good. There is so much here. And so something that just came to me that I don't have in my notes, I want to share this. Can I tell you why? And I'll get back to my notes. Can I tell you why he saw the face of God in Esau? It's because he looked at Esau and saw forgiveness. Jacob didn't deserve to be forgiven. Jacob is a jerk. Even in his reconciliation, he's kind of a tool bag. He sends out his kids first, then the wife that he doesn't like, and then him and Rachel are chilling in the back with Joseph. He said, if he's going to slaughter people, kill these ones first. At least I got the wife and the kid that I wanted. Everybody else, fodder. You can kill them. Even in his repentance, he was scummy. But he still received forgiveness. If that's not an image of God, how many times have we come to God with half-hearted repentance? Sloppy repentance. Wish-washy, kind of halfway, yet he meets us with his presence. He experienced unmerited grace. He experienced such a profound mercy in this moment that Jacob concluded, I'm experiencing God. When we extend, do you want people to see God in you? Easy. Forgive those that don't deserve to be forgiven. The people who are least deserving of grace, give them grace. The most unlikable person at your job place, be forgiving toward that person. Pray blessing for that person. Give them a grace and a mercy. You know how family dynamics are weird? I mean, I don't experience this personally, but I'm sure other families do. That one family member that everybody's agreed that we're just going to kind of shun that person. Be the first one to forgive. Now, I'm not saying open yourself up to get trauma and get hurt and everything like that. But what I'm saying is forgive, show grace, show mercy, and oh my goodness, the people will see. You know, we want to shine with God's glory like Moses. I want to go on the mountaintop, and I want to have this incredible prayer meeting and so touch God. But Esau did it first, and he did it the hard way by forgiving somebody who did him wrong. And he had every reason to kill this man, and he didn't. He was, I could put it like this. I heard a speaker say one time, talking about betrayal. It was Jordan Peterson. He was talking about betrayal. He said, betrayal is one of the worst hurts a human can experience. And the reason is because when betrayal happens is because when you have relationships with people, you build life with this person. And so you have this whole reality built with somebody. And when you experience betrayal, that world comes tumbling down because you go through every moment you went through with this person and you realize they were never really in your corner. And so that makes you rethink. That's devastating. It's hard on the human psyche. It is so damaging to experience betrayal. You wonder, and then when you deal with that person going forward, you start to question every motive, every move, it is hard to experience betrayal and then to move on beyond it. That's what Esau did. He said, I see God's face in that. That is so beautiful. You see, the first time Jacob saw Esau, he was an instrument. He was something to be used. He was a stepping stone. He was an ends to a means to an end. However the phrase goes, right? He's like, hey, I want what you got, and and whatever I have to do to get it, that's what I'm going to do. That's how he saw Esau, and that was it. Esau was someone to be treaded upon so that Jacob could get what he wanted, but now he saw Esau with his proper value as a fellow image of God. And in light of that image, is worthy of proper treatment. We need to see Jesus in our brothers and sisters. Show them unmerited grace, unmerited favor, but also see them as the image of God. And it's really hard to sin against the image of God. We have to turn our perspective toward one another. And notice, too, it said that Jacob was thinking, well, because I'm blessed, now I want to bless. He was fulfilling the Abrahamic blessing, right? When we think about the blessing of Abraham, we think about God's blessed me, God's blessed me, God's blessed me, and that's fine. But the purpose of God's blessing was not for us to merely be recipients. We act like storehouses for the blessings when we're supposed to be a water hose. God didn't bless you so you can have a bunch of nice stuff. That's an additional benefit. The primary reason that you are blessed is so you can bless others. Your increase, the way we're supposed to think about our increase is I'm just a hose for it to pass through. It's passing from God's hand to my hand to somebody else's hands. That's how we're supposed to think chiefly. And what happens is he's giving you so much that as you're giving out to others, but there's still some left for you. That's how you take care of yourself. It's because I've given so much away, but there's still so much left of the blessing that there's room enough for me to be blessed. That's how it's supposed to be. But what happened is we hoard for ourselves, and so then when we start doing that, we turn off the channel of the blessing. We're supposed to be a conduit of the blessing, not, oh, here's my bank account, Lord. Just go fill it up. Go ahead, fill it up, Lord. You said, oh, this bank account, they won't insure anymore. That's okay. I got another bank. That's okay. Lord, just give me more. You can't treat the blessing of God like that. Okay. How's that? Was that good? Okay. All right, very good. Let's look at another one. This was wild. There's something that I noticed here that I hadn't noticed before. So this is going to be interesting. So the next one we're going to talk about is the 2 encounters that he has. 2 encounters. So let's see. Right? So let's say encounters with God. So first, it said Bethel. And another one is Penuel. You know, however it's spelled. Close enough. All right. That'll get us most of the way there. Okay. 2 encounters. 2 encounters. This first encounter is so crazy. If you oh, there it is. Okay, we're good. If you read with a discerning eye what's happening here, this is actually kind of a crazy experience. Genesis 28. And I just want to share some of this stuff with you. I don't know why I've never paid attention to it before. Just maybe that's the thing. It's because we speed read through the Bible. Like that is, I'd rather you read 10 verses a day than try to read the Bible in a year. But carefully, slowly read the 10. It's so much more effective. It's just, oh my goodness. Yeah, it'd be better to read the Bible slow. Like most Bibles have the little markers for paragraphs. I'll let you know this is a paragraph. If all you did was read 1 paragraph per day, it would take you a long time to get through the Bible, but I bet you'd understand it way better. There's so much like this that happens. Okay, so Genesis 28 and verse 17. It says, and he was afraid and said, 28:17, how dreadful is this place, right? So this is the Jacob's ladder, right? He's had this vision. There's like a ladder, and there's angels descending and ascending. Do you know the other time we see angels ascend and descend in the Bible? Where? I don't know the book. I just know the phrase. Ascending and descending on the what? On the Son of Man. Ascending and descending on the Son of Man, right? So I really haven't thought this through. So how is this moment connected to the angels ascending and descending on Jesus? Dream, vision? I don't have an answer. I don't know. I'm sure there is an answer. I mean, I just haven't thought about it. I just thought it was interesting, right, that both it uses, that's a really weird phrase, ascending and descending, two places, here and ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So we can all meditate about it together, and then when we think of something, put it in a Slack. It'll be good. We can have a little discussion board. But so that's the vision that just happened, and he woke up and he was shook. Jacob was very afraid. He said, "How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." And so Jacob rose up early in the morning. So he had this crazy encounter with God. He took the stone that he had for his pillow, and he set up a pillar and poured some oil on top of it. And he said, "I'm going to call this place Bethel," which is the house of God. And the name of that city was called Luz at first. But he said, it's the house of God now. And pay really close attention to the wording here, okay? So I'm going to read a little bit slow, but this is intentional. I want you to really pay attention to how this is worded. "And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, 'If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall,'" and I'm gonna translate this a little bit different. It says the Lord. In Hebrew, that's a personal name. So that's a name. So I'll read it this way. "Then shall Yahweh be my God. And this stone, which I have set for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that I shall give, I will surely give thee the 10th unto thee." Is there something standing out to you guys that it's like odd about this? Anybody, just shout it out. What's odd? Mm-hmm. Yes. So Jacob's very forward. And then he's bargaining. He said, "If I'm going to be in relationship with you, I'll set the conditions." This is Jacob. He says, "God, I'm going to walk with you according to my terms, how I want to." Anything else? Hmm? Right. Conditionally, but he says he's going to. Okay. He said, "God's given me 100%, but I'll give you 10." Okay. I want to point this out to you because this is crazy. He said, "Then shall Yahweh be my God." This is going to sound a little controversial. I don't think he's monotheistic at this point. I think he still worships other gods. I still think he worships other gods at this point. He said, "Then will you be my God?" Because right now, he said, you're my dad's God. And when he makes a vow with what's his uncle name? Laban? Where he makes a vow at Laban, notice that when they evoke the covenant between them, Laban calls on the gods of not just Abraham, but also Terah, who was a pagan. So he went into covenant willingly evoking pagan gods. I don't think Jacob was sold out to this Yahweh yet. And he was like, if you're going to be the dominant God in my life, okay, listen. The gods of Babylon are pretty cool. The gods of the Canaanites, all these gods are great. I'm trying to see which one's going to give me the best offer. And then you have my allegiance. But don't we do the same thing? We try everything else, right? I want to have these sorts of relationships. I want to have wealth and fame. We go to everything else. We try everything else and say, I'll give my allegiance to whatever gives me the greatest reward. And isn't he just like us? He comes to Yahweh later in his life. After he did everything under the sun, he said, now you'll be my God. What's interesting is he doesn't address God by name as Yahweh until his next encounter with God. So his whole life, he never called on the name of Yahweh. He make mention of him one time to Laban, but he didn't talk to him. He had him in his back pocket, just in case Laban respected who he was. But that was it. That wasn't his God. That was such a moment for me. I was like, yo, this man is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Jacob is a pagan, bro. He's a pagan. This is interesting because, that shouldn't be a problem because Abraham started off a pagan too, which this tells you about faith passing through generations. Isaac took dad's faith and he was on it. 2 generations removed, things got liberal. He started to drift away. You can look at churches that are, you say, a couple generations. So churches that are about their 60-year anniversary or so. Imagine when that church first started, rockin' church. 60 years later, you can hardly believe it's the same church. You can hardly believe. Or you see it with companies. This mom and pop shop had the best service ever. 50 years later, you go in there, you know, the rudest customer service ever. You see a roach crawl out of this place. Oh, my God, what is that? You see, years later, this is not Grandpa's vision. He said, that's Grandpa's God. That's my dad's God. I don't know this Yahweh. Listen, you bless me, and then we'll see what happens. That was so gutsy. This man, Jacob, if nothing else, he built different. Could you imagine going to God and just being that upfront? Yeah, I'll walk with you if it benefits me, okay? But if not, you can go be Yahweh somewhere else, all right? You can go, Jesus, you're cool, but only if you give me what I want. But now, the moment you start asking for me, I don't want that. Crazy. And also, so Levisha talked about the tithing thing. I want to add this. He said, only after I'm convinced of who you are, then I'll tithe. Which gets to the heart of tithing. The heart, and I see what to sneak tithing in there. There we go. See, the heart of tithing is about trust. Tithing is about people who, when I see people pay tithes, to me, has very little to do with, to me, it's not so much here's a command, so I'm going to do it. It's, there's 2 things that I know about this person. One, they trust that God is going to take care of my finances. They said, I'd rather have the 90% and it be blessed than to have the 100% and then just fend for it myself. Because that's your options. It's you get the 90% and it's blessed 90, or you get the 100 and let's hope your wisdom and your budgeting is good enough. But so the person that tithes tells me I have complete faith in God. The other thing is they recognize that he is Lord. And because he is my God, I know that the New Testament requires me to give generously. And because the New Testament asks of me to give generously, I'm going to trust him. I'm going to give generously. To me, it's a trust issue. And that's why, when I tell people, they say, oh, I'm struggling with tithing, really, it's a faith issue. It's a faith issue. And unless you make, and I'm speaking as a person who I made very little, and now I'm making a little bit more, praise the Lord. Unless you're making great amount of money, trust me, your tithe is not going to make or break where, for most people, it's not really going to make or break whether you can pay your bills. You're probably just not budgeting properly. Like if you get a check for $500, your tithe is $50. If $50 are making or breaking whether you can pay your bill, I'm just curious, what does your budgeting look like? I find this problem more so with younger people than I do with older people. Not to say it can't happen with older people, but you look at a young person, I just don't have the money, but I can't pay my bills. But then they go to Starbucks, and then they eat out every week, and then they're not cooking. And I'm like, dude, make it make sense. They have an Amazon Prime membership. They have a Netflix, and they have all these subscriptions. I'm like, bro, do you not have it, or like what's going on? Like, is it the tithe that's killing you, or your lack of budgeting? Like, come on now. Like, be smart. Oh, I can't eat the same thing every day. It's because you've never been poor enough. Yes, you can. Bro, make a pot of spaghetti. That's 4-5 days right there. I'm tired of spaghetti. I'd rather have spaghetti than be hungry. So, no. Now, can I tell you when tithing gets real hard? When you stroke a check for the church and you have $1,000 leaving your account, when that happens, it gets real hard to give. It gets real hard to give when you see $1,000 going out of your account. It gets real hard to give when your giving statement at the end of the year is tens of thousands. You've given more to the church than you've given in taxes. You look at that and you're like, Lord, we got bills to pay. Right? It's hard. It's hard to give. So, anyway, we're not talking about giving. We're talking about Jacob. And so, hopefully people feel sufficiently convicted. Let's be faithful in our giving. Amen. That's not what this is about tonight. Okay, let's look at this other encounter with God. Let's look at this other encounter with God. Genesis 32. And so in this first encounter, it was very much like, hey, you're one of many gods, so whatever. You don't have my allegiance. But this time, let's read it. Genesis 32. Let's look at verse 9. I'm going to read 9 through 12. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, he said, Yahweh, which said to me, return into thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have showed your servant. His attitude is real different. He is coming to God real different right now. For which my staff I passed over this Jordan. Right? And so I'll stop right there. You see this? He said, I'm your servant, undeserving of mercy, undeserving. And he's calling him by his name. And he was saying, you're my grandpa's God. You're my dad's God. But now, you're my God. What got him in this position? Danger. Fear of his life. It is far too common as the American church to have a very negative viewpoint of hardships and trials and tribulations. We view it so differently. It's uncomfortable to be in that place, but it's in that place that Yahweh went from their God to my God. He went from, if you'll bless me, to, I'm undeserving of all your mercy. I'm but your servant. His whole attitude changed, which means if we're going to have an encounter with God, this bargaining business, we can't do that. If we're going to have an encounter with God that, see, he encountered God tremendously the first time, but he wasn't changed. Sometimes we're wondering, God, I feel your presence, but why am I still the same? It's because you're not coming properly. You're coming bargaining still. God didn't want you to bargain. You come humbly. You come humbly before the throne of grace. You boldly, but humbly. And say, God, I'm your servant. I'm not boasting of my goodness, but God, I'm your servant. And what I need, God, I need you. He was lowered himself before God. And it's that posture mixed with the presence that caused him to be changed. Also, you know what? I think this is good too. Remember his name at first. They called him plain. He wasn't moldable. You know what else made him moldable? Life. Life made him moldable. He was deceived by his uncle. He was getting chased by his brother. Hardships of life, they made him moldable. The problems that we complain about, that God, why did I go through all this? Could it be that these are the very situations that you needed to be moldable because you were too hard-headed? That you wouldn't have listened to God other way? You're too strong-willed. You're too hard. We live with the way of the fool. So we need stripes on our back because we're living like the foolish. Instead of hearing the instructions of others and learning, we got to go through it the hard way. The way of the fool is hard. And maybe what we needed to be pliable was these difficult situations. Let's press on. Genesis 32. Let's look at verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and he wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except that thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince has power with God and with men, and has prevailed. And Jacob asked him, Okay, now tell me, I pray thee, what is your name? And he said, Wherefore is it that thou ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of that place. I spelled that so wrong. Peniel. That's probably somebody's name somewhere. I'm banking on it. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And he passed over Penuel. See, that's probably what I was thinking of. There we go, Penuel. And the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh, so he hobbled, right? He was crippled now. Therefore, the children of Israel, and okay, that's not relevant for this part. We'll save that for another time. The kosher laws and all that. Okay. And so I'm short on time, so I'm going to read this very quickly and power through this. So some things about this exchange that's important. So maybe some helpful things for you that you can make use of for having encounters with God that change you. He was alone. Maybe it could be, I'm all about gathering together. I preach it all the time. I believe in the church. The church is important. But if the only time you encounter God is at church, you will not be changed. It has to happen when you're also alone. Notice that it was at night. It wasn't on the mountaintop in the daylight. It was in the night. The weeping endures for a night. Well, it's while they're in the night. Well, there's the weeping. It was the weeping and the wrestling in the night. Sometimes it's in our most difficult situations where we're poised for true transformation. Persistence. He persisted. He persisted with God. If we're ever going to prevail, we first must persist. Persistence is the prologue to victory. If you quit praying for what you're praying for, you can't expect to be changed. You must keep praying. It must be the case that we have to. And remember, he left changed. Before he haggled with God, but this time this was his God. When we come to God on his terms, it positions us to be changed. Okay. He was not moldable before, but now he was moldable. So I'm technically out of time, but I'm going to abuse my power. Pastoral abuse, abusing the whole church. You're all victims of it now. I'm going to abuse you all, and I'm going to take an extra 5 minutes because I want to just wrap this up because I don't want to go into the next week talking about Jacob. I want to move on to Joseph. Joseph is an immensely interesting character, and so I want to talk about Joseph. And so for me to do that, let me have this conversation. Okay, so the very center of this, I'm not going to write it this time for the sake of time, is this the birth of Joseph. And I checked with a bunch of different people who did outlines of Jacob's life, and everybody puts Joseph's birth at the center. I'm like, this just feels kind of anticlimactic to me, so why did it matter? I think the background matters. What we're supposed to be seeing behind it is that in the midst of all of human striving and all of us doing what's pleasing in our own eyes, our own humaning and being humans, this is supposed to be the backdrop. Genesis chapter 3, 14 and 15. oh man, I have the wrong verses copied here. That's all right. That's why I have my paper Bible. It's in Genesis chapter 3, 14 and 15. It says, no, I was right. It was 15 and 16. I just, error on my part. Okay. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, and he shall bruise your head, and shall bruise thy heel. Unto the woman he said, I will multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and in sorrow shall thou bring forth thy children, and thou shalt desire, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Is that not what's happening? Leah wanted the affirmation of her husband. Her desire was for her husband. She could never get it. So that's happening there. And then it says that there'll be difficulty in conception. So Rachel has infertility issues. There's also external difficulties, tension between both of the wives, right? So there's difficulty in conception. So this difficult birth sequence is supposed to point you to verse 15, is that promised seed. The difficult birth sequence is supposed to put our mind toward the promised seed. The narrator goes very slow and uses a lot of repetition. Leah had this child, and she named it this, and then she tried to get her husband's affection, and this is what this name means. And Leah had this second child, and this, and then this one gave them the handmaid. And this is really painstakingly repetitive. When the authors are doing that, they're saying, hey, slow down. It's because what's on our mind is the promised seed, which means we're supposed to be thinking, is Joseph the one? The Genesis 3 promise that's going to bruise Satan's head, that's going to bring us back to that place of blessing. Is it Joseph? And we had every reason to think that. He was exalted to this place in Egypt, and he fed his brothers, and he brought prosperity to the known world. Surely this is the one. We're supposed to be thinking in these terms. But really, it wasn't until thousands of years later that we're supposed to be peering past Joseph and seeing Jesus. And there's so many parallels. Think about this. I'm about to read this list. Am I talking about Joseph or am I talking about Jesus? He's the object of his father's special love. He had promises of divine exaltation. He was mocked by his family. He was sold for silver. He was stripped of his robes. He was delivered up to Gentiles. He was falsely accused. He was faithful in the midst of temptation. He was thrown into prison. He stood before rulers. His power was acknowledged by those in authority. He saves his rebellious brothers from death when they realize who he is. He's exalted after and through humiliation. He embraces God's purpose even though it brings him intense physical harm. He's the instrument that God uses at the hands of Gentiles to bless his people. He welcomes Gentiles to be part of his family. He gives hungry people bread, and people must bow their knee before him. Is that Joseph or Jesus? The answer is yes. We see so much of Jesus in the Joseph story. And the reason why is that the Bible is starting to train us to read with anticipation. We're supposed to learn to read the Bible forward facing. It's teaching us to think about what's next. And what was obviously next was Jesus. But the anticipation doesn't stop there. We're supposed to read with that same anticipation today. What's coming for us? We're supposed to read the Bible so that every present moment that we're living in now is filled with hopeful expectation. This is a skill that is indispensable to all people of faith. Final verse for the evening, Philippians chapter 3. Verse 20, for our conversation or our citizenship is in heaven, from whence also we look for the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body, according to the working whereby he is able even to subdue all things unto himself. I end with this. I'm thankful for the work of Christ at his first advent, but I am eagerly awaiting for what's to come. I'm eagerly awaiting for that second coming. Because at that time, then I'll be changed. I take off this corruptible and I put on incorruptible. And we can finally see him face to face. And it's this anticipation, it's this eagerness that I bring to the Bible every time I read the word, hoping and waiting. I'm looking through the lattice of his words just to get a glimpse of the glory that I'm going to experience someday. And we learn that when we look at the center of the Jacob story. We learn to look to the future, look for the promise, and hold on to that. So I think that's what the author's trying to do, maybe. And so with that, I'm done. So hopefully, no, well, okay. When you clap like that, it makes it awkward. It's not a presentation. I'm just passionate about something. So I want to field a couple of questions. Right there. Yes. This is worth reading also in the New American Standard. It reads very beautifully. This is an incredible. There's some phrasing that he uses that our citizenship's in heaven, is that we're eagerly waiting for the Lord. I like some of the language that that translation committee used. Any questions? Any questions? Both. Both. It was both. Yeah, he did. Yes, yes. And so I think it's a both and. It's Esau gave up his birthright, which is true, but he was also manipulated, right? In a vulnerable time. Could you like if that's not deception, if Noah was dying, the man he got airdropped from the Air Force. He hadn't eaten in 30 days. Emaciated. He needed food. And I'm like, bro, I'll give you food, bro. Just sign over the deed of your car. Just sign it over, man. I'll give you the food. And Noah in his mind, he hasn't eaten for 30 days. He's like, why do I need a car if I'm going to die? Here's the deed. You got it. Was I a brother? Or to put it in Cain and Abel language, was I my brother's keeper? What did I do instead? I threatened him with life and death. Instead of actually killing him, I killed his vision, I killed his dream. Same thing. It's the Cain and Abel story all over again. Instead of being my brother's keeper like I was supposed to be, I took advantage of my brother. I gave him a really garbage soup, and I got a car out of it. Right? That's what happened. And so, yes, he willingly gave me the car, but it was at coercion. I manipulated. It was deception happened. So, yes. Any other questions? Yes. 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 Yeah. But that tracks. Well, that's also still on. That's on brand for was that Rebecca?